Amen. If we turn to the Great Controversy, GC 648. (648). Paragraph 3. If you're using the book, it's the very last paragraph of the chapter. It begins upon. Upon the crystal sea before the throne, that sea of glass as it were mingled with fire, so resplendent is it with the glory of God. I gathered the company that have gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name. So does anybody know what Bible verse that is?
Revelation 15.
So I'm just waiting for someone to confirm. And the verse?
2.
Revelation 15 verse 2. We don't need to turn there unless you want to. With the Lamb upon Mount Zion, having the harps of God, they stand the 144,000 that were redeemed from among men, and there is heard as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of a great thunder, the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne, a song which no man can learn, save the 144,000. It is the song of Moses and the Lamb, song of deliverance. None but the 144,000 can learn that song, for it is the song of their experience, an experience such as no other company have ever had. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These, having been translated from the earth, from among the living, are counted as the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. Revelation 15, Revelation 14. These are they which come out of great tribulation. They have passed through the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. They have endured the anguish of the time of Jacob's trouble. They have stood without an intercessor through the final outpouring of God's judgment. But they have been delivered, for they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. In their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before God. Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth upon the throne shall dwell among them. They have seen the earth wasted with famine and pestilence, the sun having power to scorch men with great heat, and they themselves have endured suffering, hunger and thirst. But they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of water, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Revelation 7. So, are there any characteristics here that are new to you, or that we didn't pick up yesterday, or that have any impact on the discussion about the line of the 144,000, that maybe change your mind or reinforce a concept that you already have? I mean, it's not a new passage, I'm sure we've all read this before, but it's kind of a refresher. It's easy to forget things. Brother Philip?
They come from the tribulation they passed through. They come from come out of the great tribulation, passed through the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. That's Jacob's time of trouble. She actually says they have endured the anguish of the Jacob's time of trouble.
Okay, so we're a couple of lines from the top of 649. I'll just read that. These are they which come out of great tribulation. They have passed through the time of Jacob's through the time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, they have endured the anguish of the time of Jacob's trouble. So she's explaining Jacob's time of trouble in 3 different ways, with 3 different phrases. Is that how we read that? Yeah? Are we all there? Okay, we're in 648, paragraph 3. She's, I don't know if you can see where she actually puts the Bible verses, Revelation 15:2, Revelation 14:1. It's the next sentence. These are they which come out of great tribulation. So you've got great tribulation, the time of trouble such as never was, and then she's going to call this Jacob's time of trouble. So it's those 3 titles. Are they a repeat and enlarge? Brother Theodore?
She says it's the final outpouring of God's judgments. So
And that's the next characteristics.
yeah.
Sister Tamina?
I was going to say the same.
Okay. So this is the plagues. Is that what you're picking up? So it's great tribulation. This one can be tricky. Why? There are 2 times of trouble. So I've just called this time of trouble. Then I'm going to call it Jacob's time of trouble. And then what's the last one she says? Are we okay to put 7 plagues here? She doesn't say that. Yeah? And there's no intercessor. And what does that mean? Could I put Daniel 12:1? Yeah. So it's Michael stood up, and therefore there's no intercessor. Does anybody have any queries on any of those thoughts? For some of us, they may seem, relatively straightforward, but I'm not assuming that for everybody. Maybe we haven't thought about it before. Maybe we've seen it differently. Maybe it's new. Everybody okay? Yeah. So I'm saying all of this is connected specifically to the 144,000, and the sentence above says that they have been translated from the earth. So we've got the translation here, they don't die. I'm not sure if we picked any of this up yesterday, did we? I don't see it anywhere there. Basically, this is the time period in which they're going to be doing the experience that she's speaking about, and there's no intercessor. So I'm saying that's clearly this history. Yeah? I don't know if anybody... The only reason we're labouring this point is because there still seems, or I don't know if there is now, but there were questions at least about the veracity of this line and its function, its purpose. Does it even exist? What does it mean? Especially when our focus has been a close of probation here at Sunday Law. It just seems to me that this line goes way past the Sunday Law. It's 144,000. It's a story about God's people. And as soon as you start talking in the context of this history here, to me, the natural question would be, how did you get here? Where did you begin your journey? And that's what I think a reform line is supposed to show us, the details of how you get from the beginning to the end of your journey. Brother Clayton.
Are you stating that those 4 events, the Great Tribulation, the time of trouble, Jacob's time of trouble, and the 7 last plagues, are 4 separate events or attributes of a similar event?
So, obviously, that's just I think 2 sentences there, maybe even 1. So my question is that a repeat and enlarge, all the same event, or 4 separate ones? I'm asking how we see it. Brother Philip says it's all the same event.
If by the time of trouble we mean the great time of trouble.
Oh yes, so the Great Tribulation.
Yeah.
So the reason there is that way, because you go to Matthew 24, there is a time of tribulation such as never was upon the earth, she talks about.
So it's one event, and you're just describing it 4 different ways.
How do you see it?
I hadn't really considered that at that point. I don't know.
Anyone else? Because I'm chapter 40. Are you in chapter 40 in your Sabbath school? Yeah. But you haven't got to this bit yet? Okay. So, Brother Graham.
In Sabbath school, it was pointed out that Jacob's time of trouble is a small period of time within that history.
Okay, so we can make refinements to this. So if this was Daniel 12:1, you can't get all of this, what I'm drawing, from this passage. I don't think you can. Second Advent, you'd have to do a bit more research. There's a death decree. I'll just put law. This death decree happens sometime after Daniel 12:1, and once this decree goes forth, this is where she seems to be marking Jacob's time of trouble. But in this scenario, how she's writing it, she doesn't seem to be making this distinction. It's just when there's no intercessor, it's Jacob's time of trouble. So she's just merged those 2 points. It's just a refinement. That's how I would explain that. So is Brother Clayton's question, are we saying all of these are just synonymous terms? I think Brother Theodore said he believes that it is.
Yeah, they don't always have the same starting and ending point, but they're all part of that same period. So pretty much synonymous.
So was it just a question, or does that cause you consternation?
No, it's a question. I'd never considered that.
Okay. How have you thought about it before then?
I thought it was one event. I just thought it was one, the Jacob's time of trouble would be a descriptor of that, would be the Great Tribulation or the time of trouble. That's how I just, but that was just without really studying it.
Okay. So I think we're all in agreement with that. They're just there's different titles for the same thing.
Okay.
So I don't know if we've laboured that point enough, that there's agreement that this is a valid line, and it's the line of God's people. I'm not arguing that you could develop another line that would speak of the world or Babylon in the same history, but we can add that in to explain some things. But to me, the purpose of the reform line is to see how God cleans up the mess on earth. And are we okay to start the history here? The reasons why we would do that? Yeah? No? Brother Tyler, why would you? Where would you start that line? If you're going to say yes to 89, why?
Why start instead of somewhere after or before?
Yeah.
I think I guess it kind of, it's easier to see when you look at the title Final Generation. We know that from 1989, this is where the reform line is going to begin, the complete reform line. So from 1989 to Second Advent is the final generation. This is the last group of people. So from that standpoint, I see that. In terms of 144,000, maybe I'm wrong to say it this way, but the people who are the group of people that the 144,000, that group of people starts at 1989. Maybe not all of them are right there right then, but that's when this group of people begins to be assembled, and they're going to go forward until they're fully assembled, and they go through all these different waymarks, and come out at the end. But in all of it, I don't see another way of putting it, or a better place to put it. And then if you're looking at Adventism, maybe that's the harder one to see. The one you can get more tripped up on, because you could make an argument maybe for somewhere back in the past. But in all of it, I don't see another way of putting it. And then if you're looking at Adventism, maybe that's the harder one to see. The one you can get more tripped up on, because you could make an argument maybe for somewhere back in the past. like 1798 or 1844 or something like that. But the other two, I think, seem fairly simple, I guess. Maybe that's an overstatement, though.
Sister Rachel, I'm not saying specifically 1989, but why can't you go back much further than that when we talk about the 144,000? You could go a little bit before that, but why can't you go, why could you not go back to 1844 or 1888 or another major waymark back in the history of Adventism when we're talking about this group of people?
Because if they don't die, that's an awful, they can't live that long. I don't know.
Okay, so that's the argument that we have, this argue about in translation. You're limited to how far you can go back. And that's where that concept of the final generation really comes. We pick it up from Matthew 24, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And we've discussed that in class, how we approach that problem. When it says all these things, what all these things mean. And we've seen contextually that it's talking about those two classes that are there at the very end of that story, where the parable of the fig tree is expressed. After that, then she does this repeat and enlarge, and then it culminates, Jesus does, and then it culminates in Matthew 25, which is another story about that end time history. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto two groups of servants. In Matthew 25, it talks about two groups of virgins. So when it talks about the generation, you can't go all the way back to AD 31. Just contextually, you can't do that. But many people do, and if you do that, then you have to spiritualize what a generation is. And then people have another problem because it picks up the signs of the sun, moon, and stars. You'll notice explicitly Jesus doesn't mention the earthquake. The earthquake is introduced in Revelation 6. We read that yesterday, verse 12. That's how Ellen White is going to bring the Lisbon earthquake into the story, which she does mention in the Great Controversy. But her focus is upon 1780, connected with 1773. So we've discussed that. You've seen how Sister Tess has used those, at least 1773, she didn't really talk about 1780, and brought that into the story. So if you do that and then you go all the way to 29 to 30, 31, in Matthew 24, talks about then shall they see the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven. And what we tend to do is we say that's Daniel chapter 7 verse 13. That's October 1844. And I'm saying I don't think it really is. You can make an application to that, but it was meant to be the second advent that happens in the Millerite history, and it essentially doesn't happen. So you then have to take that Millerite history and bring it into our own history, and then it becomes problematic of how you address the sun, moon and stars, the second advent, which we really don't ever get into. Sister Tamina.
I was going to ask if we can line it up with Daniel 2, the cutting out of the stone, because we see the cutting out from 1989 to 9/11, and the 144,000 need to be alive, so it can't be beforehand. And if you cut out the stone, that kingdom is going to fill the entire earth.
Okay, so you can see the imagery in Daniel 2, but could you go to Daniel 2 as an original source, separate and distinct, to actually mark the time of the end? How would you do that? No, I'm not saying it's an application. I'm just asking, how would you use Daniel 2 to independently verify?
Because the stone is going to strike the image at the feet, and you know that this is at the time. The feet down there, it's the time of the end. Sorry. The stone is going to strike the imagery at the feet, which is at the time of the end.
So how do you know when the cutting, how do you know it's at the time of the end?
When you go through the kingdoms, I mean, when damn there, isn't that the time of the end?
I'm okay with your logic. I'm just seeing how well do you know that the logic to develop your argument.
Because there's no kingdom afterwards anymore.
Okay, so it's the last kingdom.
Yeah, it's the last kingdom.
How do you pick up the cutting out is at the time of the end? That's all. I guess that's what I'm asking.
Well, I guess I connected with the building of Solomon's temple, where we have the cutting out of the stones which form a temple.
Okay. Brother Philip?
When you asked this, a quote came back to my mind where Ellen White says, "Through the increase of knowledge, a people shall be prepared to stand in the last days," or something like this. I know it's in the Time of the End magazine. And we can go and have a study on Daniel 11:40 or 40 to 45 and show why, and the reform lines show why 1989 is an increase of knowledge. And through that increase of knowledge, people shall be prepared to stand in the last days. And I think that those people are the 144,000. So I guess that's how I connect why the 144,000, their preparation or their experience starts in 1989.
Everybody understand that logic? So it's through an increase of knowledge. Does anybody know where that quote is? So we could just read it together.
CTR 338, but I'm going to find a more original one.
So if we go to 17MR, I don't know if I had mentioned it before. 17MR, the two letters that Ellen White writes to John Harper Bell. Yeah, it's from the same letter. This is letter number 2. It's one that we've already read, actually, this passage. The book that was sealed was not the book of Revelation. Oh, sorry, 17MR 6.3. 17MR 6.3. The book that was sealed was not the book of Revelation, but that portion of the prophecy of Daniel which relates to the last days. The scripture says, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. When the book was opened, the proclamation was made, time shall be no longer." The book of Daniel is now unsealed, and the revelation made by Christ to John is to come to all the inhabitants of the earth. By the increase of knowledge, a people is to be prepared to stand in the latter days. And then she's going to quote the first angel's message. So you have to add a bit of information here to make the point that Brother Philip's making, but I think it's a valid point. We all remember the portion that's at the bottom of page 6 when it says, "When the book was opened, the proclamation was made, time shall be no longer," because that's Revelation 10. So she's connecting Revelation 14 and Revelation 10. Brother Daniel, you okay with that logic as we discussed it?
That's 1840?
That's 1840, not 1798.
Yeah.
Yeah? Don't sound like sad when you say that. It's good.
Yeah, it's because the book is unsealed in 1788, but it's fully open 1840.
Yeah. And and just that simple argument that we had is when you're passing along the ground, you can see back and you can see ahead of yourself. If we remember that, just that concept allows us, I think, to give a defense that the book is unsealed, the seven thunders uttered their voices before they're all fulfilled. Because those seven thunders are not only explaining your past experience, they're also explaining the experience that you're about to go through. Does that make sense? I know not everybody maybe have been in that class, but for those who were, that's part of that logic to explain, for me, why we can place the unsealing, not literally, but midway, halfway through a reform line. How could they have known everything halfway through a reform line about what, because the events haven't even happened, the seven thunders haven't even completed their work yet, and they know. That's one point. The other point that we picked up here is that the Millerites knew the seven thunders. And sometimes we argue that they don't. I'm suggesting that they do. Just like we do. We know the seven thunders. So I like that point. We can mark the increase of knowledge. We've brought in different points. But we've got 1989, the final generation. We can't go much further than that. It's the beginning of a reform line. And it's through the increase of knowledge that people are going to be prepared to stand. The phrase latter days can be used in different contexts. In the one that we're looking at now, we're picking up 1989. But you know that this latter days that she's referring to here is 1798. Do you agree with that? This is 1798 that she's speaking of. Or maybe you don't agree. You don't agree, Brother Philip?
I didn't read it like this. Maybe I have to look at it from a different angle. I thought that she's talking about, that I don't know if she was thinking about 1798. I'm sure we can apply it to 1798 for sure.
Yeah, we can make lots of applications. I want to know what the original. Yeah. Okay, go back one paragraph. No, go down one paragraph. You see Revelation 14, 6 and 7? Yeah. First angel's message. Yeah. Go back up one paragraph. 6.2.
7.2.
No, 6.2. Go up one more.
Okay. Yes.
The first and second messages were given in 1843, 1844, and we are now under the proclamation of the third. So I'm suggesting that the anchor point or the context is Millerite history, 43, 44. I'm not trying to explain why she says the first angel's message is in 43, and we give 1798, 40, we give different dates. On the chart it says 37. So you've got lots of different dates of the first angel's message. We've got at least 4 there. 1798, 40, she gives 43 here, the chart says 37. So you have different dates. So before we move on, Sister Bronwyn.
Oh wait.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
The seven thunders, when he utters them, you're saying he's uttering things that will be happening. But where do you get your logic that it seems that already happened behind him? Maybe I don't.
From the passage that we read from that present truth document, when the special light comes, it reflects back. In the context, do you remember the passage that I'm talking about? It's in the notes that we had. I don't think if I'd probably be able to find them. Okay, this is the present truth for November 4, 1886, paragraph 7. I'll just read it to you. If you do have your notes, it's the paragraph that says Daniel. It's on page 6. Daniel also was made a channel of light for the generations to come to the end of time. He caused the light of God's purposes, hidden from the great men and the mighty potentates of earth, and reflected this on the proud courts of kings. Courts of kings and earth's greatest despots, and revealed to them not only the majesty of God as supreme ruler in the heavens. I want to cut down. Next sentence, I think it is. The light of heaven beamed out upon a blind and apostate race in clear, steady, living rays. And when the light of the world, the Son of Righteousness, has once risen, its illuminating rays were not only reflecting the light to the future, but back through the preceding generations, giving significance to the whole plan and purpose of God from Adam's day down through the patriarchs and prophets. The old ceremonies were lighted up. The original context is the cross. Once the cross happens, it illuminates what the Old Testament sacrificial system was about, and then it also pointed to the consummation at the end of the world. In the context of Adventism, the argument that we have with evangelical Christianity in this history is, what is that? Because she says this cross is going to illuminate the past. That's the lambs, the sacrifices. How does it illuminate the future? Just contextually here. So I've given the clue. This is the argument that we as Adventists have against the whole of Christendom. When it talks about the cross will illuminate the future. And it's a specific phrase that I know Brother Theodore knows the answer to. So I'm trying to tease out if someone else does without giving you all the clues. What is our big issue, Adventists against the world? What makes us unique? Not the Sabbath. Most people think it's the Sabbath.
Prophecy?
Not proper.
The lines?
When
Investigative judgment.
the atonement.
Okay, so it's the atonement. And once you go to the atonement, it's here on the 1843 chart. It's the sanctuary. So Brother Theodore. Oh, Sister Chiquetta, you had your hand up? Brother Theodore?
Yeah, well, the book Kingdom of the Cults, which is the first book I read after I became a Seventh-day Adventist, that's really clearly the whole issue. They have no problem with us keeping the Sabbath. Even the state of the dead, though they don't agree with it, it doesn't make us a cult. But it's the atonement that makes us a cult.
Because what do we teach with respect to the atonement?
What we teach, the atonement is not completed at the cross. Now, the church compromised in their wording so that the evangelicals were happy with us. But they didn't have to change the Sabbath, they didn't have to change the state of the dead, but they had to change the nature of Christ and the nature of the atonement, which are related to each other.
So she's not saying it directly because she only goes to the past, the ceremonies. But I understand what she says, the cross illuminates the future. It's the work of atonement is not complete at the cross, and whatever happens there is shedding light on 1844 when the atonement is complete. All we did was take that principle and make an application, just really simply to say this, that at a point here when there's light, this light will, she uses the word reflect, sheds light into the future and into the past. And I just made an application to say, if this was 1840, it explains 1798, and it also is going to explain 1844. We'd have to put 1843 if you're going to do this technically, but I put 44. And we know that's true, isn't it? Litch's work explains the past, it verifies Miller's work through an independent channel using the same methodology, and then it's also going to explain here, because what are they able to say? Time is no longer. And hopefully we know what time is no longer means. Okay, Brother Tyler?
Did we, when we were dealing with the word reflect, did we identify, I know we talked about it, but I don't remember exactly. When she says it reflects light, I'm wondering if it means it's reflecting off of something, or it's being cast directly from the source. And I remember we had a discussion about this, but I don't remember what we said. Or if we even came to a conclusion on it.
Okay, so we're going to pick up that question in a moment. So we looked at that present truth document, and we made an application that, I'm not trying to suggest that 1840 is the cross, I'm not trying to do that. All I'm saying is that there's this idea that at a point in time, something happens that sheds light on the past and upon the future. And I made an application here at 1840. trying to go back to the passage that we were reading. This is, that was 17 MR, 6.3. So I've just lost my page. We went here because of the increase of knowledge. And then I just mentioned casually, at the bottom of page 6, it says, when the book was opened, the proclamation was made, time shall be no longer. And I'm saying that's 1840, not 1798, because he quotes Revelation 10. People use this passage to take Revelation 10 and bring it back to 1798. And they do that just because of the way the way this sentence flows. So I'm suggesting otherwise, that this is 1840, and she's going to connect it to 1798. And here it says, time shall be no longer. So, Brother Clayton, you were saying?
I understood that in the past, that there would be no more time prophecies. That was my understanding, and now that's all torn up, so I don't have an opinion there. Because now you're making time prophecies again, and so I don't know.
Brother Daniel, what does this mean contextually?
The Trinity, I don't know, I think it's not gonna tarry anymore, it's coming. But I forgot what we discussed about it. I think it's the 2300 day. It's not gonna pass 1844, I don't remember. But it seems like it's gonna be no longer, it's not gonna tarry anymore.
Brother Theodore?
Well, this brings us back to Daniel chapter 12. So we'd have to understand what's happening in Daniel chapter 12 as far as time is no longer.
Okay, that was mysterious. Sister Bromley?
I think what I've been taking away from the majority of your studies here with us is context, context, context. And that's how I'm seeing the current understanding of time setting, is that we really need to look at context. Maybe I'm wrong.
Who wants to have a go at this logic that we spoke about?
Are you looking at 17 MR 6.3?
6.3. Sister Kathy, do you want to try?
About time is no more.
Yeah, what does this mean?
In context to the second advent.
In context of the second advent?
Time setting for the second advent.
Dr. Tyler?
Sorry, we're 17 MR 6.3.
Yeah.
It just says time no longer. I guess I don't need to read it, but I was
that
getting
again?
there. No, sorry, I was trying to get there. Doesn't Sister White tell us she's talking about, at least when she's commenting on it, prophetic time, the end of the prophetic periods, as spoken of by like the 2520, 2300 years, that all those specific time prophecies are now fulfilled or completed.
Sister Bromley?
In specific to this passage, the one that says time shall be no longer, but the people shall be prepared to stand in the latter days, there's an obvious tie-in between time, and that is the increase of knowledge that prepares you to stand in the latter days, just by the context of that paragraph. Am I wrong?
So no, that's what I want us to see, that the increase of knowledge is the knowledge about time. We know that because the unsealing of the little book was what? Message in relation to time. The unsealing begins here in 1798. So in 1798, the unsealing begins, and the unsealing is on time. And What are they talking about when it says time? Sorry? This is prophetic time. This is the 2300 days of Daniel 8:14. That's what their message is. They understand at least that much, even though they don't fully understand the judgment. I'm not arguing that the 2520 is the first prophetic period that they come up with, and its connection to the 2300 days. But this unsealing of time is really the 2300 days. That's the focus of the Millerite message. Otherwise, it's quite clear about that, I think. Then I'm saying this is 1840 because this is Revelation 10. She's clear about that. And it says, no more time. And the increase of knowledge has happened. This statement here, 1798 took you, I'll put 44. We know that they're talking about 1843. This one here is just a confirmation of the information that went on here. When it says time no longer, it says we confirm, we verify that what we said here is true. It's based upon prophecy in Revelation 10. This is their witness that says, when we said that there's time no longer back here, there really is time no longer. We can prove it now here. And the language that we use currently is the empowerment of the first angel's message. It was stated as a theory, now it's been proven to be true, because you've got these testimonies that bring you to the stated fact that Christ is about to return here, or the judgment, even if we just say the judgment, whatever that event is. I'm not trying to make an argument that it's executive or investigative. So when it says time no longer here, it really is saying that whatever we believe about Daniel 8:14 is true. It's not saying let's not do any more time prophecies, because in fact it's saying the opposite, isn't it? If this is 1840, it's saying we need to do some more time prophecies. Brother Theodore.
I put that connection to Daniel chapter 12 because in Daniel chapter 12, the prophecy that is fulfilled in Revelation 10 is the 1335 days. And in the context then of that there shall be time no longer, this is referring to that blessing that happens after the first disappointment, where they are given this further increase of light in determining the end of the 2300 days. At least that's how I understand it. So this applies to exactly what you're saying, that when they get to the end of that 1335 days, him that waiteth and cometh to those days, those that go through that experience then receive this increase of light, which is a time prophecy. And so I don't know how that relates, and I've looked at it different ways, but in Revelation 10, when it says, thou must prophesy again before many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings, I've never known whether to apply that to that period in the 7th month movement or to the period after October 22nd, 1844, in the context. We usually make an application that that's referring to the time that we're in, but I've never known. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too much, but...
Did everybody understand what he just said? So, we've covered this in class, this bit, for those of us who were in class. Is that a reasonable refresher? Brother Clayton, does that make sense contextually?
I don't want to belabor it any further for the class if you've gone over it.
Yeah, but other people don't get it either.
I heard 4 different answers when you asked the question after I said it, so
I was embarrassed.
I just...
My students gave 4 different answers to you.
You agree with that analysis? Can I ask
Sorry?
one other thing then before?
Yeah.
Did we, at one point in this ministry between 1989 and now, we have taught what I just said, yes?
Unequivocally.
Okay, so all I am
20
is
pages of it.
I'm 10 years behind, right? with my comment there.
Yeah,
However long ago we taught that.
a couple of weeks actually, only weeks behind, because everyone's in the same place that you are, and everyone's struggling with the same struggle that you are.
Okay.
Which is why, even though we spent a couple of hours doing this, you get 4 different answers.
Okay.
This late in the game, there's still 4 different answers, because we don't, with a singular voice, understand this history in the context of reading that passage.
And I wish I could read it in front of, because I don't have it. But I think I'd understand it more. But I don't understand your point on where you're saying when it says no time, no more, or longer, that it means that we should. You made a point just a second ago that kind of means reverse, and I don't understand what you're saying.
So I'm going to go down to what Sister Bronwyn said. I think she said like context. So we have to go back to try and understand the context. So why did we come to 17MR? Let's just trace our steps. Brother Philip, why did we come here? What's the phrase?
Through the increase of knowledge.
Increase of knowledge. So we got here for increase of knowledge. Why did we do that? Because I'm saying the great controversy passage, we saw all of this, which is the end. And she says it's 144,000. I'm asking, when did they begin? The anchor point I want us to pick up is the term final generation, because they're translated. So it can't be back in 1844. Can't be 1798. So where did we begin their journey? And we say, you know, almost like a reflex action, at the time of the end. And then he, and that's all correct, so that's why that line is this long. Then Brother Philip said, well, there's an increase of knowledge that will prepare you. So we went here to read it, and the increase of knowledge is at the time of the end, and so that all fits. So what I wanted to do was go back and, as a refresher, say, well, let's remind ourselves what he's talking about here with Brother John Harper Bell. So I asked Brother Philip, what is the context of all of this? And he says it's the end of the world. And I'm saying, I don't think it is. I think it's Millerite history that she's referring to. What Harper Bell is doing is tearing up Millerite history and inventing his own thing. So there's a history of why he's doing that. He's basically a disgruntled Seventh-day Adventist who's been mistreated, and this is another layer on top of this. This is the 1888 time period. If you see when these letters were written, she's in Australia, she's writing this. I think it's 96, thereabouts. So there's a number of things happened. He's been mistreated. Oh, Harper Bell is our premier teacher. I guess you could call it a high school teacher. He's our premier person who understands the education work. And basically, he gets sidelined. You know, when we talk about work study program, all of those concepts are how to teach people. He's the one that's pushing all of this, and he gets sidelined from someone who's gone to some fancy university, and where he should have been promoted to a job as, I think, like it's the principal of a college or something. And because he doesn't have the qualification, doesn't have letters behind him, he gets promoted. So there's all these things going on, and because I guess he gets bored, he turns to prophecy and starts doing his own thing. Maybe he wants to make a name for himself. So she's talking about his understanding of what's going on. Because this is 1888, there's an argument that's happening in 1888 that Wagner and Jones are now tearing up church history. They're coming up with this new message which basically says, let's downplay Sabbath and let's upgrade your personal experience, justification by faith. And they're doing all this in the context of the third angel's message. And every Adventist knows the third angel's message is Sabbath in that history. And they're saying, well, that might be good, but we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about your sin problem. And they say that's got nothing to do with the third angel's message. And we know that they're wrong and Wagner and Jones is correct, which is why Ellen White says, I've been preaching this for ages, right from the very beginning. And that's true. From 1850 onward, one of the primary points that she wanted us to talk about is the nature of man. She actually says that. The components of the third angel's message, or present truth, is the Sabbath, the nature of man, and I think the testimony of Jesus. And I'm saying that's what the point of the 1888 message is. That's why she can say this is the beginning of the righteousness of Christ. You have to introduce the nature of man study into the third angel's message. So there's this struggle in the church between Wagner and Jones and the structure about what are the roots of Adventism? Where do we come from? Bell has his own theories now about how he's going to apply all these prophetic prophecies, and he's coming up with these strange theories. And one of them is he wants to rewrite history. So she's setting him straight here, saying, let me tell you about the first and second angel's messages, where they were put in history, and we shouldn't be moving the waymarks. So I'm suggesting, based upon a letter that's written in the 1888 time period to someone who's got misconceptions of prophecy, as she always does, she wants to take us back to the beginnings, which is the Millerite history, and she says all that that happened then was true, and we've lost our direction since then. So she said to him, get back on the path, get back on the track. So that's my argument to say that it's the Millerite history that she's dealing with. We went to those paragraphs before and after, and I think she's talking about Millerite history. We go to Revelation 10, and we know Revelation 10 is Millerite history. So the question is, how is she using that phrase there in Revelation 10 verse 6, time shall be no longer? How does John use it in Revelation 10? And I'm suggesting that what's being brought to view here is a discussion about the Millerite history. And in its original context, the purpose of Revelation 10 that takes the message from the United States and makes it worldwide is what? It's a confirmation of William Miller's methodology, that there's a distress in Europe. The distress in Europe is based upon radical Islam, Egypt. Egypt is radicalized, and the Europeans are distressed about what's happening. That's Revelation 9. Based upon the time prophecy that you can see here in 1840, the fulfillment, August 11th, 1840, Litch is going to show that the methodology that William Miller is using is correct, and it produces an impetus to the movement. And the impetus of the movement is teaching what? The end of the 2300 days is going to be here. When it says time shall be no longer, prophetic time ends here in 1844. No more time means the prophecy ends here. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be any more prophecies. It's talking about a specific prophecy, the 2300 days, Daniel 8:14, it will end here. 1840 is a confirmation of that. So in 1840 we say, yes, we agree, we can prove that the 2300 days is going to end here. It doesn't extend past 1843. I'm not making the point about 43, 44. That's what is being spoken of there. So another point that Brother Theodore picks up, and we've discussed this in class, remember. What waymark is this, Brother Daniel? 1840?
In our line?
No, in that line.
Environment?
Well, another phrase, another symbol. Oh, I asked you this yesterday. You did the same thing to me.
1E?
No, that's empowerment.
Midnight Cry?
Midnight cry. Thank you, Reverend Larry. So this is the midnight cry. Yeah? I want us to really understand this, because what's about to happen in 4 years? The true midnight cry. So I'll call that TMC. It gets so bad, by the way, in that history, that what does Snow have to do? Because he's getting blanked out. He has to publish his own magazine. Because the people who should have been supporting him say, we're not going to publish your work. So he says, okay, are self-published. That's August 21, 22? August 22, 1844. So he's going to self-publish. They call it the True Midnight Cry. And I'm saying this, they don't, because they won't use this phrase. If that's a true midnight cry, this is the false midnight cry. They don't use that phrase. They call it what, Sister Alyssa?
The false alarm, actually.
They say it's alarm. So I don't need to put in the phrase false. I don't think it says false. Check. But I don't want to use the phrase false. They say that was the alarm, this is the thing. If we can explain it that way. And this is what they're going to have to preach again. Time. Because now the movement is so jittery, Miller is publicly going to rebuke Snow and tell him, we've already been burnt on time setting. When did we get burnt on time setting? Sister Shaquetta, when did we get burnt on time setting?
1843.
Which month?
October or August? July.
You're going into 1844. You said 1843. Brother Bob?
April.
April. So April, this chart collapses. They can't use the chart anymore because they'd have to rub that out and it would just be so humiliating. So they put the chart aside. And Miller says, we're not going to do this time setting thing anymore. So when Snow resurrects this, although this was vague, but when he resurrects this one, the movement is not happy because we already know time setting is wrong. So now they're going to have to preach again a second time. So that's why you get these two midnight cries. Sister Alicia, you found that?
Yeah,
it's just alarm. Yeah, it doesn't say false. They don't have this. They never go back and trash their message. They never do that. They know that God has been leading, and all they say is, "We'll just adjust." That's their perspective, that they're going to adjust. So I'm saying the time no longer is leading you to 1844, 43. They're going to have to preach again, which is this new, the true midnight cry, as opposed to the alarm of the midnight cry. And I think contextually that's what it's talking about, that you have to preach this message again. We make an application, we take all of this and bring it outside, and we don't do that willy-nilly. Ellen White is going to talk about, there's no more time. She's going to use, I'm not saying directly Revelation 10 quote, we do it that way, but she's referring to this thing. So when it says, time shall be no longer in this history, they're saying time is the message of the moment. This statement here, time no longer, is saying the 2300 days, time is about to be fulfilled. It's a message about time, not a message against time. So we get that phrase because of Ellen White and we totally twist it. But the twisting, I think we've twisted it too much and we've not understood what Ellen White says. What does she mean, Brother Tyler, over here when she says time no longer?
None of those prophecies extend past 1844. It's nailed to 44. And so you can't go further with those specific prophecies. So when they try to do futurism with it, I guess.
So what we've done is we've taken this phrase time no longer and we think it's about time. It's not about time. All those statements are about one singular point, which is October 22nd, 1844. She says you have no authority to move that waymark. Because that's what all that time setting stuff is about. They want to adjust this, move it, to explain what's gone wrong. And she says, no, you can't. Time no longer means you can't change Daniel 8:14. It's fixed. The first angel's message had its fulfillment October 22nd, and you can't go about changing it. I'm suggesting that's what she means. So it's not even, I'll leave it at that. Brother Daniel.
I remember the other evidence we show that 1840 is pointing to October 22 because the angel of Revelation 10 is the first angel, and in 1840 the angel says, "Fear God, give me glory, because the hour of the judgment is come." So it's pointing to the time of judgment. So when she says, when Revelation 10 verse 6 says, time shall be no longer, it's pointing to 1844, October 22.
The time of the judgment is as we've already taught it. Sister Kathy.
So it was when they were setting new dates for the second Advent is when she was saying that you're moving the waymarks of the prophetic. After 1844 disappointment, the new dates were coming, but they were pointing to another Advent of the Lord.
Yes.
Which resulted then in affecting the prophetic dates.
So it's not just about moving that waymark, it's actually changing what the waymark is, because now in this history they know that October is not the second Advent anyway. They realise this is the beginning of the investigative judgment of the dead. So it's not just even moving the date, and the reason people are moving it is because they're still holding on to error, which is the point. I don't know if that's the point Sister Kathy was making, but I'm taking that from what she said. Their understanding of that date was wrong. Fundamentally, they said this was the second Advent. They know afterwards that it isn't. So time setting is not just moving the date, it's what? It's a rejection of this whole movement. So we have to even see it in that context. It's rejection of the sanctuary message. So I'm saying time setting is going to destroy the Millerite line, and it's going to destroy the sanctuary message. And if you uphold the sanctuary message, just based upon that logic, it is all about time. Brother Tyler, Sister...
Do we have any...
Nina.
From my understanding, the only thing they ever try to move, like you're saying, is the second coming. Is there any other evidence that they ever set another prophecy for something else, some other time element? Because as I think about it, I only can think of times where they're trying to move the second Advent. Or take prophecy... Yeah.
I'm going to say I don't know. Maybe my sort of version of events is overly simplistic, but that's my understanding of it. I'm sure it has implications on other things. Sister Tamina.
So after 1844, when Ellen White rebukes those people who are setting time and changing the waymarks, the aspects, as well as the dates, isn't that what we should accuse the church of today? Because they are sort of then time setting, because they're changing the waymark or the aspects about it. And if so, what do we call them what we are doing now?
I don't know if we should rebuke them, because we should feel sorry for them, really. Because we are them.
Okay, I mean, do you know what I mean?
What are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, we're saying since summer that we're saying, okay, we need to time set again. Now you just phrased that time setting is to change the waymarks, change the aspects about it, destroy the sanctuary understanding. So how can we...
No, you've just twisted everything that I've said.
Really?
I didn't say that at all.
Okay, then restate it, please. I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Restate it then, please. I don't want to walk out here with a wrong conception.
Brother Philip.
When she says, time shall be no longer, yeah, I usually used to read it, prophetic time shall be no longer after October 22nd, 1844. And I think you can still read it like this, and because when you say, well, you watch the weather and you say, sun shall be no longer, or rain shall be no longer, it doesn't mean that it's never going to come back. It might refer to a period of time where it's not going to be time, and then it might come back. It's not it doesn't say time shall be no longer forever. You understand my point?
No.
Okay. What I say is that when you say something like time shall be no longer, it might mean just for a temporary period. It doesn't say time shall be no longer forever.
Okay, I thought that's what you were saying. So you're going to say time shall be no longer now, but we can do it later on.
But because we know there's this scattering and gathering, the gathering and scattering, and during the scattering there's no time element, and the gathering. So I was connected this to that thought.
Okay, so
there will be a scattering.
If I follow through with your logic, And you're going to say there's no time now, but in the future there might be.
Okay.
That's what you're saying.
Yes.
I understand it.
Yes.
To simplify it. So, what prophetic time is there afterwards?
Well, we use prophetic time
What's your definition of prophetic time?
using using periods of time, types or prophecies from the scripture to numbers like 126.
So is that what that Millerites did?
Well, they did a much more, how to say, basic. I mean, we don't take.
I don't.
Well, maybe
I don't
maybe
call it basic.
I would call it literal. Like they, not literal. They used the year-day principle, but they did it from a face reading of the scripture. For example, if we would find there is a 70 between some date and some date, and that leads to the future, probably would mark at 70, but you can go back to the scripture and find a lot of 70 years.
I guess
So-
what the reason why I asked that question is when she says there's no more prophetic time, does she mean that or does she not mean that? Because if she doesn't mean that, then we have to find some new prophetic times, which I don't think we've found, or you have to recycle that information.
So how should I define prophetic time? Because
In the same way that she does, contextually, how they did.
so just the time prophecies from Daniel and Revelation, the classical ones, like 1260 to 2300. But what we do now with the, let's say, 490 years from that lead us to 2019, we put the 490 years there. Is that a time prophecy or is it not? I don't know.
That's the problem.
I see what you're saying. We're using the prophetic time. We're not inventing new ones. We're using the identical ones that have been used in the scriptures from the very beginning. There is no new time. It is the same ones, just applied for our generation.
So no new time.
There isn't.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not sure I'm saying that. Brother Clayton, do you understand Sister Tamina's question? Her concern, her issue?
No, I'm getting more and more confused because I hear so many different things and they're not jiving to me. What you're saying seems consistent, but what everybody else's comments don't seem to flow with that, so I'm a little confused. When
Okay.
you explained it and there was no other comments on your last long explanation of this, it made sense to me for a moment until people start talking again.
You naughty students.
I'm not being rude to anybody, please forgive me if you take it
I'll
that
be
way.
rude on your behalf. So, does everybody understand this? What I've just what I said here? Yeah, we okay. We understand that. Sister Chiquetta, does that make sense? No more time after 1844. That's what that phrase in Revelation 10 means. They're going to have to repeat the message again. The midnight cry, the true midnight cry. We're going to take all of that and we're going to make applications in a different dispensation in a different way. And because it's so ingrained in us, we haven't realized that we were ever doing that. So let me try and do this. If this is Millerite history and they say time, when they say no time, what did they mean? They mean it's about to end here. They actually mean there is time. There is time now and it's going to end in a minute, in a moment here. Ellen White's going to say no time. And what does she mean?
The time ended in 1844.
She says no time, she says it ended in 44 because, and she also means that this is the sanctuary message, or don't move the waymark. So I'm putting another layer. When she says no time, read into that. That was the sanctuary. Don't move the sanctuary. Because, in fact, when you say don't move it, what you're actually doing is destroying the sanctuary message. This is evangelical Christianity, basically. And she knows, I'm not saying she has cognition of this, 44 to 50. We discussed yesterday that Philadelphia extends to there. And so once we go to 50, and I'm saying from 50, this is when we become Laodicea. And what is the Laodicean condition? How did it come upon us? We've discussed this vaguely, but I want to see if we've picked this up. This Laodicean condition that comes upon us in 50, what is it and how did it come upon us? Scattering?
No time anymore.
No time? So I want to put this story, this narrative. Satan has a planning meeting with his angels, a war plan. He says, we've got two groups of people to deal with. We've got the world and the church, and we have to deal with them in a separate way. We'll deal with the world in one way, so I'm not talking about that because it's about the church. How do we deal with the church? The way we deal with the church is we can't make them go into spiritualism because the church won't go into spiritualism. I know we talk about that often because we kind of make this play on words. Spiritualism is doing your own thing and not listening to God's words. I understand that definition, but in the context of this meeting, he's saying what we'll do is we'll turn their focus away from the Bible and make them focus on materialism. If we can say Laodicean is materialism. And that's kind of the version that we have. Then we extend Laodicea that we're not nice people. And I'm saying Laodicea isn't that. What he wants us to do is stop reading Daniel and Revelation. So if you have a nice house and a nice car and a good job, you'll stop reading Daniel and Revelation and be focused upon your car. And if you stop reading Daniel and Revelation, you're going to do what? You're going to miss the third angel's message. So this issue here about Laodicea, where it begins, is basically to take us off the third angel's message so that we don't preach the third angel's message. That's what Laodicea is. 63 happens, and it begins what? This begins the scattering of 126 years to 1989. And in 1989, we're going to say, what? Come out of Babylonian captivity. And what is Babylonian captivity? No time. We're going to change and manipulate this concept of what Ellen White was doing, and we're going to say, we can't do any time anymore. And so we come up at 1989, and we're going to recycle this history back here, because there's the people who are going to stand in the latter days. They're going to go through an increase of knowledge on what subject? Time. And as we're doing this, we don't even know it, and that's what the problem is. We don't even know our increase of knowledge is on time, because we've been corrupted by our parents, our fathers. They corrupted us, so we don't even know what we're doing. We don't have the clarity that the Millerites had. So we've had to go through this painful, torturous experience to say, okay, our message is on time. We've had to actually bite that bullet. So when they say no time, they're saying we're in a period where we're time setting and it's going to end here. Ellen White says, stop moving that sanctuary message. There's another layer on this because there's more quotes in this one, because she's going to give some other strong quotes. But I'm just going to use that in that context. The Laodicean message, the scattering of Adventism, is the scattering of our prophetic message, which is all about time. I'm suggesting. We come here, 1989, the scattering ends, there's going to be an increase of knowledge on time, so now we're going to get back and we're going to repeat Millerite history. But because we were in such a bad condition, 1840 is what event? 9/11. That's someone just said, the midnight cry. 9/11 is the midnight cry. Then I'm going to go to 2014, 18, and this is the true midnight cry. And when the true midnight cry happens, if you go back into here, you know there's a problem about time setting. There's an internal argument about can we time set or not? And Snow wins the argument. The movement gets on board. So this is why it's the true midnight cry as opposed to the old midnight cry. Brother Theodore.
The people who have attacked us from the beginning about us being time setters with 1989 and 9/11, they were correct.
Yes.
Because we were really setting time, just we didn't know it.
Yes. And we placated them by saying we're event setters.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and we know these events, you know, okay, they're events, but it's been a long time that we've known that 9/11 was time. We've known 1989 has been time for 8 years, perhaps 7 years, quite a long time. But we would argue, well, it's in the past. We didn't identify 89 as a time, as a predictive time. We did it in the past. So we had all those arguments at the time. But now we can go to every single one of these dates virtually. I'm sure you can go to 89, 2001, 2014, 2018. And you can do all of those using the 2520. The 2520 is the key that unlocks time for us in a way that's taken us by surprise. And I'm saying this is why the church unknowingly has warred against the 2520, because Satan knows when you get the 2520, it becomes a key to unlocking time. And I don't think we've realized that. We haven't had that self-awareness. But we do now, because you can take at least 6 waymarks in our line, and there'll be more that all are unlocked by the 2520, whether it's a 1260, a 126, a 151. You can show that. So the people who say no more time here, who is that? That's us. We're saying no more time, and we mean this. The time prophecy is about to end. Is that the case, Sister Tamina? So the no more time people is us here. It's a positive statement. We're saying the time is about to end, just like the Millerites did. What's complicated is because there's another group here who fight against us and they say, by the way, we want to borrow this term and we don't want to do any more time. And that argument here, you've got 2 groups of people saying no more time, is the same argument you got back here. In this history, they call it what? Who's their opponents? Yeah, it's the people who have the 1,000 years or the millennium. The millennium says there's no more time. We don't know when Jesus is about to come back. And if he does come back, it's a spiritual coming back. So it all gets spiritualized away. So the arguments are exactly the same. Subtle differences between the two. Brother Clayton.
Are you lining up then on the other line you just did with the Millerite history, the 9/11 midnight cry down there with the alarm that Alyssa came up with, because it's the alarm?
Yeah.
Okay, I see that.
And people have manipulated 9/11 as a type, which it's not. And we got... What did the Millerites think about 1840? They thought, we're here. That's marking 1843. So there are subtle differences between their line and ours. But at 9/11, we're saying this is the thing. And we begin to realize that it actually is not the thing. It begins this whole history of the former reign that's going to lead us down to the Sunday law. And now, obviously, our message has been is quite complicated now in that sense. But it's not a trashing of 9/11, it's a reclarification of what 9/11 is. So then we say, if I say midnight cry and true midnight cry, if I say alarm and true midnight cry, we taught, just in one simple way, is this was the latter rain. Now I'm saying, no, that was the alarm that the latter rain is going to happen. But we're going to cry again a second time. We said latter rain, and now we're saying latter rain. And if you take that, those words, I'm suggesting we're not wrong now, because it's the true latter rain. We're not making a mistake now, because back in Snow's time, July and August, he's not making mistakes. Everything's correct.
Just really quick, I think that the definition for time setting that we're using is different than the definition of time setting that Ellen White was warning against, because she's speaking of this as a repeated effort to find new dates for the beginning and close of the prophetic periods, and we're not doing that.
Were you getting that? It sounds like you're reading from somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, 26th chapter of Great Controversy, page 457.1.
457.1.
In fact, what we do with time setting is we confirm, reinforce and explain what those waymarks are. This group of people here are just ripping up history. We're defending history. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for the great light that you're shining upon your people here at the end of the world. May each of us, Father, be impacted by these thoughts and ideas, not only intellectually, but may we have a spiritual experience associated with this intellectual knowledge, so that we might be the people that you want us to be. We're now, Father, in the time period of the former rain, preparing us for the Sunday law. But we see that this former rain is a time period in which we have very specific tests to pass. We find ourselves, Father, as priests in the time period of the midnight cry. Help each of us to settle into this truth and be prepared for the events that are soon to come. We ask for a blessing upon the food that you give to us now. In Jesus' name, amen.